They thought it would be funny, a cruel, heartless joke. A limping boy, already the target of their daily mockery, was handed a disabled dog with a smirk. "He's just like you," someone laughed, their voice echoing in the hallway. The dog's legs trembled, one of them clearly twisted, and his eyes mirrored the same loneliness the boy had carried for years. But what no one expected, what no one could expect, was that in that moment of cruelty, something extraordinary was born. That boy and that dog locked eyes, not in shame, but in silent understanding. And from that brokenness, something began to grow, something stronger than anyone imagined. Together, they were about to do the unthinkable, and change everything. Leo had always walked differently. His right leg dragged just slightly behind the left, a result of nerve damage from a childhood illness. It wasn't something he could hide, not in the hallways of his school where sharp eyes and sharper tongues waited for any sign of weakness. Every step he took echoed with the weight of unwanted attention. Some days, he wished he could just disappear into the floor rather than face the stares and whispers. He didn't have many friends. At recess, while other boys ran across the field chasing soccer balls, Leo sat on the sidelines, pretending not to care. Inside, though, he dreamed of running. Not just walking without pain, but truly running, the way he remembered doing once before everything changed. His world was quiet, small, and filled with invisible walls. His mother did her best, but even she couldn't shield him from the cruelty of other kids. Still, Leo was gentle, kind, and patient, traits born not from being sheltered, but from surviving. And though he barely believed it anymore, a tiny part of him still hoped that one day, something, or someone, might come along to remind him that broken doesn't mean worthless. Max hadn't always been broken. Once, he was a lively pup with boundless energy and a tail that never stopped wagging. But everything changed the day a speeding car failed to slow down. He survived the hit, but just barely. His back leg was shattered beyond repair, and after surgery, he was left with a permanent limp. His owner, impatient and unwilling to care for a damaged dog, surrendered him to the shelter without a second thought. Days turned into weeks inside that cold, echoing kennel. Max barely moved. The other dogs barked, played, even begged for attention. Max stayed in the corner, eyes distant, tail still. People came and went, glancing at him before quickly looking away. Who wanted a crippled dog? Some laughed when they saw him walk, his leg dragging slightly behind the others. "Poor thing," they'd whisper, not with compassion, but with pity. Others just stared, uncomfortable. Max began to believe he'd be stuck there forever, unwanted and invisible. But deep inside that weary body was a spark, not completely gone, just waiting. Waiting for someone who wouldn't see a broken dog, but a soul still full of love, loyalty, and fight. It happened on a cloudy Thursday, just after school let out. Leo was walking home alone, as usual, backpack swinging against his side, when a group of boys from his class caught up with him. They were loud, laughing, too loud. Leo tensed. He knew that tone all too well. One of them held a leash, and at the end of it limped a scruffy dog, its back leg dragging in an all-too-familiar way. "Hey, Leo," one of the boys called out, barely holding back a smirk. "We found your twin." They all burst into laughter as they shoved the leash toward him. Leo froze, staring at the trembling creature in front of him. The dog's eyes were wide, confused, tired. He looked just like Leo felt. The boys expected him to cry, or run, or push the dog away. But Leo did none of those things. Slowly, he crouched down and placed a gentle hand on the dog's head. Max didn't flinch, he leaned into the touch. In that brief, quiet moment, the world went still. Two souls, both mocked for how they walked, had just taken their first step, together. Leo brought Max home that same day, the leash still in his hand, his heart beating faster than he could explain. His mother raised an eyebrow when she saw the dog limping behind him. "Leo, where did you find him?" she asked gently. "He found me," Leo replied, and that was all he could say. The first few days were quiet. Max barely barked, barely moved. He'd lie on the floor near Leo's bed, eyes half closed, ears twitching at the slightest sound. Leo, too, was unsure. He fed him, left out water, and spoke in whispers, telling Max stories no one else had ever heard. One rainy night, Leo woke to the sound of soft padding across the floor. Max was struggling to reach the foot of his bed. Slowly, awkwardly, the dog climbed up, curled into a ball, and rested his head near Leo's leg. Leo didn't move, he just smiled in the dark. That was the moment it changed. Max wasn't just a dog anymore. He was family. And Leo, he wasn't just a limping boy. He was finally something he'd never truly been before, needed. Every morning, just after sunrise, Leo and Max began their new ritual. They didn't rush. They couldn't. Their steps were uneven, Leo's right foot dragging slightly, Max's back leg stiff and uncertain. But they moved together, finding rhythm in each other's imperfections. It wasn't about distance. It was about trust. Leo started using Max as motivation. At first, it was just short walks to the end of the block. Then a few steps farther each day. His physical therapist noticed the difference. Leo's posture was straighter, his spirit lighter. "What changed?" she asked. Leo just smiled and said, "I've got a walking buddy now." Max, too, was changing. His once fearful eyes were brighter. He started wagging his tail again. He even began to run, awkwardly, but joyfully, when Leo called his name. The bond between them wasn't just healing their bodies, it was reshaping their hearts. On rainy days, they stayed in and practiced commands, Leo teaching Max to sit, stay, even roll, though his roll was more of a tumble. They laughed. Together, they were building something far stronger than muscles or balance. They were rebuilding belief. In themselves, in each other, and in a world that once tried to break them. It wasn't long before people began to notice. The neighbors who once looked away now paused to watch Leo and Max during their morning walks. There was something magnetic about them, two limping figures moving forward with quiet determination. The laughter and mockery that once followed Leo had faded, replaced by silent admiration. One afternoon, a woman from across the street waved them over. "Your dog," she said with a warm smile, "he's got a spark in him." Leo nodded proudly. "So do I," he replied. At school, things began to shift too. A teacher invited Leo to share his story during a class project about courage. He stood in front of the room, Max sitting loyally by his side, and told them everything, about the joke, the bond, the journey. No one laughed. They listened. Even a few of the boys who once teased him came by later, not with insults, but with apologies. Leo didn't need their words. He had Max. And that was more than enough. One day, a flyer fluttered into Leo's hands at the community center. It was for a local charity event, a 1K walk to raise money for therapy animals. He stared at it for a long time. A year ago, the idea of joining a public event would have made him shrink. But now, he looked down at Max, who wagged his tail like he already knew the answer. They trained quietly in the early mornings and late afternoons. It wasn't easy. Some days, Leo's leg ached. Max stumbled. But they never gave up. They walked together, limping in sync, step by stubborn step. The day of the event arrived. Dozens of people gathered, able-bodied walkers, joggers, families. And then came Leo and Max. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then applause broke out. No one expected them to win. That wasn't the point. They didn't race, they moved with purpose, side by side. And when they crossed the finish line, hand and paw lifted high, the cheers that erupted weren't just for completing a walk. They were for proving something powerful, that broken doesn't mean beaten. That sometimes, the smallest steps make the loudest noise. Together, they had done the unthinkable. In the weeks that followed the charity walk, Leo and Max became local heroes. Their story was shared on social media, picked up by a small news outlet, and eventually, people from all over sent messages of love and support. But for Leo, none of that compared to the quiet joy of knowing he had finally found his place in the world, right beside Max. He no longer walked with his head down. He moved with pride. And Max no longer trembled in the corner of a kennel. He had become a symbol of resilience, of what could happen when someone chooses to see value where others only saw weakness. The boys who once mocked Leo now watched him with respect. Some even asked if they could pet Max. And Leo always said yes, because he knew the power of kindness, even when it came late. They were meant to be a joke. But in the end, they became each other's miracle, and reminded the world that sometimes the most broken souls create the most unbreakable bond.